All right, it is now set to record. So again, we've got two more framing questions that we need to deal with. And the first of these is, why is using animal pollination advantageous for angiosperms? So the answer to number 4 on the quiz, which you all got right, was C, that what makes angiosperms so successful is that they use animals for both pollination and dispersal, taking seeds to new places. Why is that advantageous? Why is that advantageous? I'm glad you asked. Okay, first, we have to tell you that this is an incredibly expensive process. If you're going to rely on animals to pollinate and to disperse your seeds, you have to attract those animals to you, right? It's a very expensive process, and this is why it's expensive. One is you have what's called the Principle of Allocation. And this says that any given organism has a limited amount of energy that it has to use for everything it does. Okay? A given individual has a limited amount of energy that it has to use for everything it does. Right? Organisms do not have an unlimited amount of energy. You're like, well, they can just keep eating. And while that might be true, but you are limited in the amount of food you can physically consume, right? And so you only have a given amount of energy that you can use for everything you need to do. So if this plant individual, and this would be for basically all angiosperms, if this plant individual produces nectar, it's taking sugars that it can use for its own growth and development and filling the flower with them, right? Does that make sense? So those are sugars the plant could use for its own growth and development, and instead it's filling its flowers with it, okay? And understanding that this plant only has a given amount of energy to invest in everything it does, it's taking something that it can use for its own growth and development and basically using it just to feed other organisms. On top of this, on top of the expense that you are not eating the sugar, but instead giving it to something else, you're attracting things that are going to potentially destroy your tissues, right? And it's basically, it's a free-for-all. Just a bowl full of sugar for everybody to come and enjoy. But as they do, a number of the plant's tissues can be destroyed in the process. And so it's an expensive and dangerous process, okay? Does that make sense? It's expensive, it's dangerous to attract animals to your tissue to spread your pollen to other individuals. So it better be worth it, right? If it's expensive and dangerous, it better be worth it. So what are the benefits? Well, first of all, animal pollination is going to reduce the self-pollination events, which will serve to increase genetic diversity. That's true. That's true. We'll have a little bit of a discussion today. We'll have some time to have this. That is genetic diversity helpful enough that it's worth investing in? Is genetic diversity healthy enough that it's worth investing in for plants and animals? It also, however, it does increase the likelihood that our male gametophytes, our pollen, actually reach the female reproductive structure, the carpel or the pistil. In most flowers, those two terms are interchangeable, pistil and carpel. In some, they aren't. So sometimes it's nice to use the more general term. Anyways, but it does increase the likelihood that every single female gamete gets fertilized. That is true. That is true. In gymnosperms, in ferns, in bryophytes, the number of female gametes, the ova that don't get fertilized, is higher than it is in angiosperms. Okay? Because these flowers that angiosperms have, right in the middle of that flower are your female gametes, and if animals are coming to get that sugar meal, they're bringing pollen with them. And sometimes pollen's from the same flower, but it does increase the likelihood of every single female gamete, every single ovum, getting fertilized. That is true, which is going to increase reproductive output. That's a win, right? That's a win. And it's going to decrease the instances of self-pollination that you find common in most other plants, unless sexes are separate, of course. And so that's going to increase genetic diversity. All right? So why is using animal pollination advantageous? The only way you can answer this question is it must increase fitness. And so fitness has a very specific meaning in biology. I don't think I've talked to you all about fitness yet. Have I?
No.
Okay. So fitness has a very specific meaning in biology. Fitness in biology is net reproductive output. Okay, a very specific meaning in biology. Well, let's make my U's the same. 2 of the 3 U's I made. Anyways, sorry. You deserve better than that, right? You deserve consistency, predictability. So fitness has a very specific meaning in biology. So the only way this could possibly be advantageous, what we mean by that, is it better increase fitness. It better increase net reproductive output. And what do we mean by net reproductive output? Because net and gross are not the same thing, right? It's like you gross pay versus net pay. Net pay is what you get after everybody else takes their share. It's like what my children get of their Happy Meals after I take my share, right? Yeah.
Isn't that just successful?
So net's what's left over after something is taken away, and what is taken away. You're on the right point. What do we mean by successful?
The weak.
Okay, so it's your offspring that actually reproduce themselves. That's the net reproductive output, because some of your offspring are not going to reproduce, right? Some of your offspring maybe get eaten before they reach sexual maturity. Some of your offspring just don't reproduce for other reasons. Maybe they're sterile or they don't find a mate, right? You got to think about this for all organisms. So gross reproductive output is just the total number of offspring you make. Net reproductive offspring or net reproductive output is the number of offspring you make that reproduce themselves. Okay? So if you produce 10,000 offspring in your life, not you, but like a fruit fly, but every single offspring is sterile, your net reproductive output is 0. Right? You produced a lot of offspring, but they're all sterile. It would be the same as you producing 0 offspring. That make sense? Okay, so if this is advantageous, you have to be able to demonstrate that a angiosperm that uses animals to pollinate has a higher reproductive output than if the angiosperm uses wind. Because angiosperms can still use wind, they can still use water like other plants do, but they also attract animals to their tissues that other plants don't do. Okay? But they could still use the other mechanisms. So you have to be able to demonstrate that using animals increases net reproductive output. You also have to be able to demonstrate that individuals that cross-pollinate have higher net reproductive output than individuals that self-pollinate. That's hard to do. That's hard to do, but we'll save that for our discussion. Okay. Any questions about this question? All right. Here's a wonderful figure from the text demonstrating a angiosperm attracting an animal to its flower in the effort to spread its pollen. And this is the beauty of it. The plant obviously doesn't have to think like, hey, it'd be a really good idea to attract some bees to my flowers, because it doesn't have to actually think about it in order for it to do it, because ideally, individuals that do it, that produce flowers at the right time when the bees are, they're going to have a higher net reproductive output than individuals that don't, that produce flowers at the wrong time. So they don't have to think about it, they just have to do it. And then here are some defensive structures that you find on a lot of angiosperms, because they're attracting animals to help them pollinate. And so at the same time, they have to protect themselves from other animals, right? Because they're basically broadcasting, hey, we're dedicating sugar to feed animals, right? And so they don't want all the animals coming to participate in that. And so you find a number of angiosperms with some defensive structures to prevent grazing or pollination by some other insects. In sunflowers, this is really cool. Listen to this. So some angiosperms, they have a mutualistic relationship with ants that they provide basically a place for ants to build their colonies. They have hollow thorns, and the ants build their colonies inside those hollow thorns. And then if something comes to graze on that plant, the ants come out of their colony and just swarm whatever it is trying to graze on that plant. Cattle, deer, people, and they just absolutely destroy them, and the plant doesn't get grazed on, right? It's wonderful. And then at the same time, these plants make flowers that bees will come and will pollinate, but they don't want the ants pollinating them because the ants stay on that plant, right? They don't move from plant to plant to plant. So they make fake flowers that have sugar but no gametes. They have sugar to feed the ants that live in their hollow thorns, but no gametes. So the ants don't self-fertilize, the bees cross-fertilize, cross-pollinate. Right? It's awesome. It's just awesome. Acacia. Bull's horn acacia. Bull's horn acacia. All right. That's it for that question. Are there any questions about that question? Yeah, Cameron.
The more like nectar or like the more like appeal that plant has, does that mean that plant has more defensive mechanisms?
Potentially, it does. What it certainly means is that the plant is investing more in attracting animals, right? The bigger the fruit are, the sweeter the fruit are, the more nectar it produces. It is a signal of a greater investment in attracting animals. That is certainly true. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to invest more in defense, right? Some things they're just really big and they produce an enormous number of seeds, right? So if you can get a tree, I don't know if you knew this or not, but trees produce a lot of seeds, okay? I don't know if you knew that or not, but you could probably reason that out. 99.999% of those seeds never produce an adult tree. But that's okay, because the 1/100th% that do are going to live for a really long time and produce a lot of seeds, right? And so they don't necessarily have to invest a lot in defense because they just invest a lot in reproductive output. They're just like, you know what, it doesn't matter that most of the seeds are going to be eaten or never be buried or just disappear to various places, right? It end up inside people's sunflower seed bags on road trips, right? It doesn't matter because they're just going to invest a huge amount in reproductive output. A lot of animals take that strategy as well. Like they don't invest anything in parental care. They don't invest anything in like powerful, defense mechanisms. They just invest a huge amount of energy into producing as many offspring as possible. So it's like, it doesn't matter that a bunch of them are going to die because those that survive are going to live a long time and produce a lot of organisms. Sea turtles, great example of that. Okay, I don't know if you knew this or not, but it's approximated that 1 in every 2,000 hatchlings that make it into the ocean. Okay, and you're thinking like, man, I've seen videos of like them trying to cross streets and people just running over dozens of these hatchlings. Like I've seen cartoons of seagulls coming and picking them up and disappearing with them. So 1 in every 2,000 that actually make it to the ocean survive to adulthood to reproduce. 1 in 2,000 that make it to the ocean. What percentage make it to the ocean? I don't know. Probably not anywhere close to 100%. But the thing is, they reach sexual maturity at about 20 to 25 years old, depending on the species, and they will live for 300 years, producing thousands of eggs every year. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's just a different strategy, right? It's just your investment is a little different. Investment's a little different. Yeah, David.
It's off topic, but for the defense plan,
Yeah.
where does the Venus flytrap
So that's to get organic material. So it's not satisfied with just getting its carbon from carbon dioxide. It wants some from organic material as well. Yeah. So it's not really a defense mechanism. It's feeding. It's actually eating animals to get organic material. Yeah. That's awesome. You find them in places where the soil is really nutrient poor. And so it's a way of combating having really nutrient poor soil. We'll just trap animals and get our nutrients from them. It's a great idea. It's wonderful, yeah.
If you're vegetarian, you could be in a fly trap, or you're still a vegetarian.
Right, I mean, yes. But I don't know why. All right. So do we measure biodiversity, or how do we measure? Not do we measure. Gosh. There's another mistake. I'm sorry, you deserve better than that. How do we measure biodiversity and why is it important? So there's actually a significant portion of this chapter that's dedicated to measuring biodiversity. And because this is the first time where we've gotten into a chapter where it's like we very clearly understand the economic value of this or of these organisms, right? Like bacteria, we talked about bioremediation, and we talked about, yes, biotechnology, thank you. And so we talk about how we can use bacteria, but it's not like everybody thinks, wow, this is an economically valuable group of organisms, right? You do now. You're like, wow, there's some economic value to bacteria. I'm gonna go culture my own yogurt and sell it on Amazon, right? But not everybody looks at it this way. Angiosperms, everybody sees them as like, this is an economically valuable group of organisms. And so for the first time, we've come to a chapter where we really need to start to think about what does this actually mean and how do we quantify this diversity, okay? This diversity. It's time for a lecture break. Okay, and I know I just introduced a question and you're like, oh man, I can't not answer this question right away. And so what I want you to do is actually answer the latter part of this question. So I won't make you answer how do we measure biodiversity because that assumes you remember what you read. It actually also assumes that you read the text. More than to just answer the homework question. But I want you to focus on this last part. Why is biodiversity important? And you don't have to just go economics with it. You can go aesthetics or something else with it. But why is biodiversity important? Right? It's a word that's thrown around that I don't know if you actually knew. Biodiversity is a mathematical concept. It may make you appreciate that word less. But it's actually a mathematical concept. But why is it important? Why do we care about biodiversity? Why when somebody publishes an article and says that the diversity of this ecosystem or the diversity of this group of organisms is on the decline, why do we care? Why do we care? Okay, so take 2 minutes, focus on the latter part of this question, starting now. Why is biodiversity important?
It's gonna decrease. Yeah, a lot of people like this go up because there's less
I also think as well with just if something gets like threat or something like that, if biodiversity is on the decline, that means it can lead to it causes to have to change. What happens there, it can really affect ecosystems as well.
or like an example of bees, you know how it's the same size.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also, these flowers need a fertilizer as well.
Yeah. So yeah, I think like you're saying, it can definitely affect the biodiversity as well, which that has a lot of to the economy.
All right. Let's gather around. Intellectually, not physically. You can stay where you are. We're already gathered around, I suppose. Although I said something about the middle, and I feel like maybe there are more people sitting in the middle now. But it's fine. I understand it. When I was a student, I was like a back corner kind of student. That right back there. That was me. Although everybody knew I was there, even though I was in the back corner, because my mouth never, ever stopped running. If there was a question, I was answering it just because I felt compelled to do so. But anyways, not to say that that's the way you should be, Jeremiah. Just, giving you all a picture into my past. I'm sure everybody loved me. Yeah. All right. Why is biodiversity important, Amanda?
Biodiversity is important that it ensures the survival of the plant, especially if there's like a massive environmental change. If the plant didn't have like the different characteristics that it receives through the crossbreeding, it probably wouldn't survive major environmental changes.
Okay.
So like the example I was thinking of is like with the extremophiles. If they hadn't evolved, they probably would not have survived the environmental change that came.
Okay. So providing some kind of stability. Yeah. Levi.
Actually used an example. Like
Okay. Bananas.
have really, really low biodiversity because they've been subjected to the selective breeding.
Oh, so you're talking about genetic diversity.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, genetic and trait.
Yeah. Okay.
Traits too.
Yeah.
But when one thing happens, almost all the bananas die, and it's a big crisis.
That is a crisis because bananas are delicious.
Yeah, it is. It's a crisis.
And if you have to pay more for bananas, I mean, that's just sad. Like, I want to be able to go in and get them for 49 cents a pound at most. If I have to pay 55 cents a pound, that's an atrocity.
But the population is very, very delicate.
Yeah.
Even the slightest change can really affect it. So it's
All right. Yeah, Cameron.
Each species kind of has their own like niche in the
Yeah.
environment, and so if one is struggling, then the other species can come and fill up that gap.
Yeah, especially if your biodiversity is high. What it does is it protects the entire ecosystem, right? So I say we, assuming like you are part of this group as well. Scientists, like, we pick like our pet project, if you will. It's like the organism that we do our research on, so we care a lot about it, and we try to like hype up its ecological importance to make other people care about it. But it's really just kind of, I mean, it's just like a dog and pony show, right? It's like the reality is, there are plenty of organisms that could fill that role as long as your ecosystem has a lot of biodiversity, right? And that's something about biodiversity that's really important, is that it protects and cushions the ecosystem from collapse, right? And so I've never tried to argue that raccoons are important, even though they're kind of my pet thing, because I understand they're really not, and they're disgusting. I think the world might actually be a better place without raccoons, but they're here. And so let's figure out how they work and what we do with them, right? Yeah, Micah.
So along that line, we were talking about how if you see decline in one organism, you'll see decline in organisms connected to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, even though there may be another species that can step in and fill that role, the reality is every animal is food for something else, right? Even like, you're like, well, what about like an apex predator, right? Like a lion, it's not really food for something else. It is for other lions, right? And then if it dies, other things eat it, right? So everything is food for something else. And so some things rely really heavily on it, not because the ecosystem requires it, but it's just because this is what I always eat, right? This is what I always eat. Yeah. Any other ideas on why biodiversity is important? Yeah, Chloe.
When you have healthy biodiversity, it's able to provide a number of natural services to anyone, like including us and other animals and organisms.
Yeah, so if you know that there's some significant, meaningful stability in that ecosystem, you know that you can harvest something in a sustainable way and the ecosystem's not going to collapse, right? Like, man, we really get a lot of benefit from this harvesting this particular organism. can we do so in a sustainable way? And when biodiversity is high, sustainability is much easier to accomplish. And really, sustainability is nice because it's like, can we be confident that we can harvest this year after year after year? Or is it basically, we're going to harvest this year and it's done, right? Two completely different strategies, right? We're going to harvest it this year and kind of store those products up, or are we going to do this in a sustainable way that we can use for a long time? Two different strategies. Two different strategies of how you use ecosystems for our benefit. I can think of one other one that nobody's come up with. Biodiversity is important because it brings God glory, right? I mean, the reality is God puts his handiwork on display for everyone to see. Some things exist not because they're really, really important to us, right? They help us survive. They exist because they bring God glory in existing, right? And so biodiversity, the more biodiversity you have, the more intricately woven the ecosystem is together, the more it glorifies God. And it's a very, very important aspect of biodiversity that's oftentimes, I think, ignored. So generally, and again, I already mentioned this, biodiversity, it's a mathematical concept, but it's a mathematical concept measuring the amount of variation in living forms. Okay, so again, it's a mathematical concept that measures the amount of variation there is in living forms. It can be done at any level. You could do it at any taxonomic rank. You could do biodiversity at the level of phylum, although that'd be pretty boring. You could do it at the level of order, or I guess I skipped class. You could do it at the level of class or order or family or genus or species, but it's usually done at the level of species. And because what this allows us to do is to actually focus in on all the different relationships in an ecosystem. And we'll talk about ecosystem structures a couple of weeks from now. But suffice it to say, ecosystems tend to have a lot of species living there, right? And then so we need some way in which we could quantify what do we mean by a lot, right? And how do we compare various ecosystems? So yeah, it can be measured at any taxon, be measured within a single species, or at other ecological levels. And the reason why it's introduced in this chapter is because we use plants for a number of different products, right? We use plants for a number of different products. We eat plants, we use plants to make medicines, we use plants to make building materials, we use plants to make chemicals that are used in manufacturing. And so knowing that, we need to kind of have an idea, are we going to be able to depend upon this particular area year after year after year for a long time, right? Kind of shapes how we structure our economy. On top of that, we understand that not only do we rely on plants for a number of materials, and so it's probably a good idea to harvest those materials in a sustainable way that we can count on them year after year, but we also have to understand that plants are important in just maintaining the stability of ecosystems. We say this, protecting watersheds, and what we mean by that is preserving the way water drains off of a landscape, which is an incredibly important factor with building, right? Like, where do you build, and you determine where you build based on how water drains off of that landscape. And so if you can't preserve the way water drains, it makes building kind of a little bit like rolling the dice. Like, we're going to build here, hopefully in 10 years from now, water will still drain the same way, so this house won't be washed away, right? Preventing erosion, and again, that shapes a lot of things, like, can we protect the bank next to a river, right? A lot of people like to build their houses on rivers or on the coast. Like, can we protect this coastland from not falling into the ocean or into the river? A lot of that's done by plants holding the land in place, moderating climate, providing shelter, all of these things, okay? So plants are important for us and our economy, and then at the same time, they're important for maintaining the stability of ecosystems. And so having an understanding of biodiversity allows us to understand how we can access the resources in this ecosystems in meaningful ways. All right, does that make sense? Cool. So here's a figure from the text. And yeah, it just shows us some of the I don't know, most important. I don't know why they chose the things that they did. They're trying to illustrate how we use plants for various purposes, agricultural purposes, just aesthetics, manufacturing materials and medicines, for building materials. And yeah, I mean it's an interesting figure to help to demonstrate how we use plants. I don't know. I think I would have done it a little bit differently. Probably would have put a house maybe on there. I don't know. Just putting that out there instead of actually just putting the plant. Maybe put a picture of some of the medicines that are made harvesting materials from that plant. But I didn't make the figure, so nobody asked me what I thought. All right. Any questions about this question? Because what we're going to do now is something a little bit different. We in a number of weeks have had holiday shortened weeks, and so we've been given like 2 days of class time to cover an entire chapter rather than 3. This week we had 3 full days to cover this chapter, and so we're actually through all of the framing questions, and we have an opportunity to do a more prolonged discussion time. So we'll have some additional lecture break questions, which is good, because for you've learned now that these are important questions to know how to answer, and what this basically functions as is a practice exam for you. And that's not why I designed it. I designed it to facilitate some good discussion, but it's like dual purpose, right? Dual purpose. It's like the football wasn't designed as a weapon, it was designed as a plaything, but man, it works really nicely to hit somebody right in the side of the head, right? It's a dual purpose. Dual purpose. I see the older brothers, you understand what I mean, right? And the younger brothers of sisters, right? You understand what I mean as well. Sorry. All right.
Doesn't anybody want brothers?
So, lecture break questions. What I would like for you to do is take the next 2 minutes and address this question with those around you. Do all plants root back to a common ancestor? And I know root back, pun intended. Do they all root back to a common ancestor? And as you do this, I want you to provide evidence in support of this. Okay? So if you're going to say no, at least say no. However, there are these reasons to suggest that it's possible, right? And if you say yes, then you can cite some of those ideas. I mean, I think it's fairly clear that the Bible says no, therefore that would be the primary evidence that I would use against it, which very few of you did on your exam, by the way. I don't know if you felt like this isn't allowed. I don't know, like if you're asked to give 3 evidences against something sharing common ancestry, using scripture as one of those evidences is perfectly satisfactory. In fact, I would say it's a really good idea because it's probably the best evidence against it. Anyways, but that's another story for another time. Some of you did, and so that was nice. It was refreshing. But do all plants root back to a common ancestor? Take 2 minutes. Even if you say no, provide some reasons why you might think so. Okay? 2 minutes, starting now.
Hold on, writing it down. I don't want you to speak. No. I gotta hear you. Come on, baby. We want to hear you.
So, offline work
What do you mean? No, because
It's amazing. Yeah, everybody, all 42 students.
I'm gonna drop the concept.
What's that? I don't know, I didn't count.
So no, because Professor English said it.
Remember, if you say no, you're providing why you might think so.
Because he said that's one reason, right?
why do plants so no?
Got about 45 seconds.
Regions that worldviews are created from.
Yeah, and he's like, the question is like, and the unicorns in September, you actually have in place. There
Yeah.
Alrighty. So, while it is a good idea to use scripture as evidence against, certain groups sharing common ancestry, it's probably not a good idea to on your exam write because Dr. Ingalls said that they can't. Okay? That's not it. I mean, I'll smile and I'll probably circle it and say thanks and then take 3 points off for not including good evidence against it. So, just, putting that out there. I don't care so much that you know what I say. I care more that you understand what's going on, right? You don't have to believe what I believe. All right, so do all plants root back to a common ancestor? Amanda.
I would say no,
But, remember, we're just focusing on but.
Yeah.
Why would you think that they may?
There are a lot of different environments that are similar and yet different, and so you'll find like similar plants in those environments that are similar but they're not quite the same.
So you're no, but you might suggest that they are because we can explain the variation in plants with the variation in environments, right? That we can make sense of it all. We can explain. It's plants are far more simpler to do that than say all eukaryotes, right? Because all eukaryotes, the thing is like we've got all different types of eukaryotes living in the same place, and you're like, well, we can't really use environmental differences to explain those differences, but we typically can with plants, right? Why don't you typically find bryophytes and seedless tracheophytes? Why don't you tend to find those in dry, arid places? Because they don't have the mechanisms to live isolated from water. But plants that do are going to be there. Yeah, so we can make sense of it. Yeah. So no, right? We can talk later about why is it no, or why might you say no? But right now we're like no, but you might think so because we can explain the variation in plants with the variation in environments. Why else? Yeah, Tara.
Just no, but you can see the similarities why someone would think that since they share a lot of reproductive tissue, like even though they're formulated differently and used differently, like the seeds versus like seedless plants, one could see how one would think that it would adapt to become.
Yeah, and it's especially intriguing the whole seed plants versus seedless plants. We're reorganizing tissues, and you can even see that in the development. Like in Gymnosperms and Angiosperms, when pollen develops, you watch your male gametophyte develop into pollen. You see that happen. You see that reorganization happen. So no, but it's feasible how you could shift from plant type to plant type. Yeah. David.
There's evidence for plants' complexity increasing throughout time.
Yeah, so when you look in the fossil record, your more complex plants appear later than your less complex plants do, right? Bryophytes appear first in the fossil record. Our seedless vascular plants like ferns appear next. Our gymnosperms appear next. And our angiosperms appear last in the Cretaceous. Although remember we said Triassic with a question mark? Do you remember that? It was last week sometime. Maybe it wasn't last week. Maybe it was Monday. It probably couldn't have been last week because we didn't talk about angiosperms. But the reason for the question mark is we don't actually have any fossil evidence of angiosperms until the Cretaceous. But in terms of getting it all to make sense, they would have had to have existed at least back as far as the Triassic and just not left any fossil remnants until the Cretaceous. But from a interventionist perspective, they've existed the whole time, right? The whole fossil record should contain angiosperms, but doesn't until the Cretaceous. And then from the dominant scientific paradigm, at least the whole Mesozoic, Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous should, but only the Cretaceous does. So regardless of your view of origins, angiosperms present a problem because they don't show up in the fossil record until after they had to have already existed. And then the question is why? The question is why? Yeah. Any other answers to this question? Do all plants root back? Yeah, Micah.
We were saying that many plants share similar chlorophyll pigments.
Yeah, chemically plants are very similar to each other and to green algae.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can look different, but they're similar.
Yeah, they can look very, very different, but the way they harvest sunlight is the same. And how they store excess energy is the same. And so they're chemically very similar, and yet they look very, very different. It's kind of fun. Yeah, Autumn.
In plants, it's easier to see the less complex plants and developing into more complex.
Yeah, it's easier to tell that story, right? So if you make a phylogeny, and we saw this for plants, there aren't any dashed lines because we know what those ancestors would look like, and we actually have living examples of them. Not just fossil examples, but living examples of what those different types of organisms would look like. Now, we do have some issues, and we'll talk about those. We've got some big, big issues. But are you getting a sense of why you may not feel compelled to say no at all, and I was going to say that's fine. I don't actually believe it is fine, but it's understandable why you would not feel compelled to say no. But even if you say no, do you understand why there's still reason to believe that the answer is yes? Okay. Yeah. All right. So next question. 2 minutes. Are gymnosperms more like seedless plants than angiosperms are? So we've got two different types of seed plants, gymnosperms and angiosperms. And we talk about angiosperms are more complex. So does that actually mean that gymnosperms are more like seedless plants than angiosperms are? Take 2 minutes talking about this starting now.
Seedless plants.
Like, sure.
Yes, since
They are
simple. They have gymnosperms, right?
Yeah.
They don't produce
Yeah. They also don't rely on animals for reproduction. They have to, especially for normal time. Yeah, they use the wind, which similarly seedless plants that have to use water. Yeah. And so I think in complexity, the next step would be still inactive, but by the wind.
right.
And then the next step of complexity.
Because a lot of the plants would deal with water.
They have to be
And then
and that's supposedly the highest level of complexity because now they can be separated from water with regards to reproduction.
All right.
Good job, guys.
So what are some thoughts on this? What are some thoughts? Are gymnosperms more like seedless plants than angiosperms are? Allison.
I would say that they're more like angiosperms because the sporophyte is the dominant generation.
So they're more like angiosperms than they are like seedless plants?
Yes.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. Although we do have some seedless plants, the ferns, that the sporophyte is still the dominant generation, right? So all vascular plants, the sporophyte's the dominant generation, meaning what they spend the most of their life history as. But they are certainly more like the other seed plants than they are like the seedless. But are they more like seedless plants than angiosperms are like seedless plants? Yeah, it's Russell. Yeah.
I would say that gymnosperms, or at least one point supporting gymnosperms being more like seedless plants, could be that it wouldn't make sense to go straight from no seeds to a fruit surrounding a seed. It would make much more sense to have just the bare seeds first.
Oh, sure, right? The bare naked seed before you get to a coated seed that can survive the gut of an animal.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're going to surround the seed in fruit to attract animals to come and eat that to disperse your seeds, right, you need some way to protect those seeds from the digestive tract of an animal. I know you want to finish this, and I can see how badly you want to finish it, but we are out of time. So we are going to have to finish this discussion on Monday. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of your 100% Friday.